Good morning. Welcome to Emit Baptist Sunday School Hour. We are in our Sunday School series of the great I Ams in the Gospel of John. Jesus proclaiming 7 I Am statements or sayings, as we've just mentioned. This is our second I Am study, but it's the third in our series, maybe fourth. And it appears that the way God is leading here, that we will do 2 lessons per I am saying. That's just seems the way that God's leading us here. So, before we go any further, with this great teaching from one of my favorite books in the Bible, the Gospel of John, we'll go to the Lord in prayer and ask for His blessing and guidance. It is His lesson to teach and not mine, and also to give us the ears to hear what Jesus is saying here. Father, we thank you this morning, God. I thank you for those that will be watching this and listening. God, they won't be looking at me, Lord. We're going to be listening to you. And so we ask now, God, that these things that are said, the thoughts that are given are yours and not mine. For I'm a wicked man, Lord, just saved by grace, by the gift of God, and to know you, Lord Jesus, as my Savior. But apart from that, I'm a pitiful fellow, God, and thank you for salvation. I pray we would understand that. We would value you and value our salvation. So God, I pray now that you would just take this word, this great word of you being the light of the world, God, and it is a fascinating and glorious week of studying about light in the Bible, and today we're going to do that, Lord, by your power. So be with us, grant us your favor here, Lord. Again, we're so thankful that you revealed yourself through your Son. And God, today, this is all about you and being the light of the world. And we love you, Jesus, for what you've given us here, Lord. And we just give you thanks and ask for your blessing. In Jesus' name, amen. The light of the world. Let's go back just a second and go back to last week. Great lesson last week. The bread. And we talked about... Jesus said 4 times, he said in John chapter 6, verse 35, verse 41, 48, and 51, I am the bread of life. He said, I am the living bread in verse 51. And then one time he just said that I am the bread. And then we deciphered what our bread is, and certainly we need bread. But what we concluded in that study last week that we really need to understand, it began with the feeding of the 5,000, okay, and it was a massive, and that's understated in a sense. Most Bible scholars believe that would have been more like 15 or 20,000 by the time you counted children and wives, and that was the men. But not only was he the giver of bread, and he was, and he is. He's Jehovah Jireh. He's the God that gives, and certainly bread is part of that. But not only was he the giver of bread, more importantly to us, more importantly, eternally speaking, he was the bread. He came to be bread for us. He came to be the sacrifice. He came to redeem us from our sins, the final sacrifice of sin. Death always required, sin always required a death. It always did. He brought Israel up in that. You sacrifice. Been reading through Exodus, and God's used this as the test for Pharaoh, and he hardened Pharaoh's heart. But they wanted to go out 3 days journey, and they wanted to take their everything, all their livestock. And so why would they want to take all their livestock out there? Well, they had to have livestock for the sacrifice. And so Moses said no. One time Pharaoh said, yeah, y'all just go, but just your men. No, we want the children. You just go, but leave your life. No, we need the livestock. There's always been needed a sacrifice for sin, and Jesus certainly was that. So not only was he the giver of bread, he was the bread. Not only was he doing signs, in other words, he was performing miracles, and they were looking at the miracles, and it was many times they were just looking to whatever benefit they could, they wanted to see a sign. And remember, they were looking for Jesus because they just wanted to eat again. And they missed the spiritual side of things. So he was teaching them, not only do I do the miracles, I am the miracle. Amen. And he was the miracle that came down out of heaven. And he said that over and over, the bread that came from heaven. So today, the second I am listed in John as we progress through the book here is very interesting here, because in John 8:12, Jesus said this, and we're going to read this verse a lot. Here's what he said. Then Jesus again, and we'll talk about context and a lot of things about that in just a minute, spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. Now listen to this. He's making a statement. Then he's going to kind of tell us something here. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness. He's such simple but so deep. But we'll have, in other words, you follow me, but we'll have the light of life. And light here is capitalized. I am the light, and anytime, we all names are capitalized, right? Okay. But when we have something like light or bread, it'll be capitalized. And in those instances, that means that is God. Okay. The Son of God. The Son's always capitalized, meaning it is God. So light here means God. Well, I am the light. God saying I'm light. Jesus saying I'm light. And this light, this God, gives life. I am the God of life. It says we will have he follows me, will have light of life. You're basically going to have, if you're going to have life eternal, you must have God, and it must be through Jesus. So here's what's interesting about this. And I saw a sermon, YouTube sermon, and the pastor was saying, it's kind of hard to kind of teach this because about what I'm about to say. There's just one verse. He just says, I am the light of the world, and he who follows me will not walk in darkness, but he will have the light of life, and that's it. In other words, there's no more mention about life after that, light after that. But and what we're going to do is this morning, we're going to, Lord willing, we're just going to look at the subject of light in the Bible. And then next week, we're going to look at the context here of what Jesus was saying and the events after that. And so we'll speak on that as we progress through here. So that being said, I wrote a little note. Sometimes God doesn't have to say a whole lot to make his point. Amen. Isn't that right? I mean, when he told, what about when he just, talked about the I am, and the original I am. You just tell him I am. That's what he told Moses to tell him. You just tell him that I am. And we talked about how simple that was, but how profound. So God doesn't have to say a whole lot to make much of it. And the I ams of God are really just simple analogies. They really are. Bread, light, vine. We'll go through all of these. Shepherd. We got 7 of them to go. We're on number 2. They're simple analogies about a profound, deep spiritual truth of God. And they're easy. They're not hard to understand, really. And remember this. Let's go back to a verse that seems like I speak of it every, it seems like months. We've been, at some point in the lesson, we go back to this verse. Remember the purpose of John's gospel was to prove out by eyewitnesses and things they saw and things they heard, because they were with Jesus. John was the disciple whom Jesus loved, and he was really close, one of the closest. There was 3 of those disciples, Peter, James, and John, that were very close to Jesus, the inner circle. And so they knew him, and most of what they wrote, a lot of what they wrote, they heard Jesus say, and were with him, witnessed it. But John's gospel the purpose was to prove that Jesus was who he was, that he was the Son of God. He did come from heaven. Remember that over in, I don't know what it is, John 20:31. We talked about that verse. I don't have it written down this morning. But in John 1:18, he says something like this in part of that verse. Speaking of Jesus, he said of him, he came to explain God. And I'm just here to tell you this morning what a little bit of 4 weeks or so studying the I am. This is exactly what the I ams are. The I ams that Jesus proclaims here, he is explaining God. He's explaining himself. He's explaining God. And praise God that God doesn't leave us in, quote, the dark. And the darkness is a subject you can't really talk about light until we mention darkness. So we're gonna touch on these things this morning. So the I ams explain God. Thank Jesus for that. Thankful he came to save, but he came to teach us and explain God. And I love that. I love that as a teacher. I wish every one of you would be a teacher that you would be somewhat, I use the word hesitantly, forced into studying. And most of us that teach are honest enough to say that if I wasn't if I didn't have to teach every Sunday, I wouldn't be in the Word. But I'm a teacher, and God has blessed us because we are in the Word, because we don't want to mess it up. We want to know what we're talking about, what God's talking about. So I take that very, very seriously. And most teachers that I know in Emit Grove is just we've just been so blessed there with people that really want to know about God. They really want to. They want to dispel any perversion or deception of God's Word, which is rampant, is everywhere. And you take a little bit of Scripture and put a bunch of worldly things around it and try to justify it. But we know that's not so. So let's do this. This is the subject this morning of light in the Bible. Jesus just one time here says, "I am the light of the world." Okay, but let's go back. I just want to just do a kind of a quickly go through the whole Bible. No, we're going to start in the Bible at the first and end up at the end. But let's just talk about these things about light. Light in the Bible is written down, and boy, I got so many varied information when I Google this. If you ever, I say this a lot. If you, we have some good things. There's some good things in media. I'm not a media person. I've never been on Facebook. I'm just trying to. God's helped me to keep me out of the world. But anyway, that being said, if you ever Google something and you're looking for something spiritual, some real truth, the key that I found is to put Bible first. Put that as the first word. That way, that engine search is going to go to the Holy Word of God. Okay. And there's still some things that can be in there not correct that you might pull up, but it's going to eliminate about 90% of them. I Google light, and I don't know how many different numbers came up of how many times light is in the Bible. Now, light is an interesting word. There's 6 entries in Webster's, in my little Webster's dictionary that I keep close by, of light alone. I don't know if I can ever recall a word in the dictionary that had so many entries. 3 of those are concerning the light, as far as what we're going to talk about today. The lamps on my desk right here, that kind of light that emits. And so it's, but anyway, 200 or 300 times in the Bible, light is mentioned. I'm just widening that. So it's an important word. It's a fascinating word that God has given us. And Webster says this. I love this first definition. The very first one says something that makes vision possible. Something that makes vision possible. Something that helps me to see. Like I said, it's a very fascinating word, and I'm telling you right here, this is what really, I think this is what this whole lesson today is about, of how God can take a physical thing that we can look at and study, even scientifically. We're going to look at that in just a minute, and how it parallels the spiritual side of things. They run in parallel. It's 2 rails on a railroad track, and a railroad track has to be perfectly spaced out all the way. It can't have it can't be off 2 or 3 inches at any point, because the train will derail. Okay, it's interesting how, and sometimes physical things parallel the spiritual, and it's all through the Bible. All these analogies, and it really is what the I ams are of a physical thing. Parables were taught the same way. Masterful parables Jesus taught. I'm so thankful the way God has led us in these Sunday school lessons, because we've been doing that. We went through the parables. We went through the salvations in the Bible. We went through our eternal rewards. And I'm telling you, we have just had a ball in these studies. And then we go right back to Jesus again. And I'm so glad that He's guiding, because it was horrifying to me as a teacher not to have material to go by. God, I don't know what to talk about. But I tell you, these last few years, He's given us plenty to talk about, and I'm very thankful as a teacher. So it's just crazy how God is kind of, and I don't mean that crazy, but just marvelously crazy, miraculous, how all of these series of lessons have fit together, and it's from the pulpit. Pastor Tim's preaching on the same things, a lot of the same things, just amazing. We don't get together. That's the Holy Spirit guiding 2 different men that were coming to the same conclusion, that God is who He is. So light, we look at this. Now let's start. light is very fascinating because light is mentioned very early in the Bible, so early that it's verse 3 of the scriptures. And it is also mentioned at the very end in the last chapter of the Bible. So light is, we mentioned 300 times. But I tell you what, you always have to go back to the beginning. And we go back to Genesis 1. We go back to Genesis in the beginning, to the very first chapter. And this verse, Genesis 1:1, is the verse of faith. Interesting, isn't it? Starts with something and ends with something. Starts with light, ends with light, starts with faith, ends with faith. In the beginning, God. No explanation where God came from, how he did these things. What he just is, and he was there. Remember, he is the I am. You just tell him that I am. I will be there ever how I'll be there. In the beginning, God created. And when he gets to verse 3, God said this, let there be light. Let there be light. And there was light. In other words, he spoke it into existence. We've known that. We've heard that. And then verse 4, listen to this. And we can't leave this alone. God saw that the light was good. He saw that it was good, and he separated, listen to this, he separated the light from the darkness. Okay? That's just verses 3 and 4 in chapter 1. So from the very beginning, he creates light, and this is very fascinating and interesting. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure we heard this not long ago from the pulpit, that it wasn't that God created our sun, the S-U-N, that shines outside in the daytime then. He said, let there be light. There was not a star, a sun, a moon, or any of celestial bodies in what we call outer space or the second heaven until the fourth day. So for 3 days, there was a light that was just spoken by God. And that has profound meaning. And we'll mention this in just a minute as we close out on this little section of light in the Bible, a very quick look at light in the Bible. And by the way, again, it's the first time in the creation. Remember, every day God created, he said, what did he? So we'll ask you, what did he say? He said it was good. The only exception to that, it was still good, was when he created us. And then he said it was very good. It was exceptionally good, was man. But it was good. And I think by the time we get through this morning, you're going to have a better understanding and appreciation of light that comes. So the very first, from the very beginning, light was first. Light, we depended on it. Nothing else could function without light. Then we go to Exodus 10:23, and here we go, a plug for reading through the Bible. And amazing how God just puts these things in my path as we teach a lesson and reading through the Bible, how things line up. The scriptures always support scripture. But in Exodus 10:23, I think we read it yesterday, in the ninth plague, could have been this morning, on Egypt, that he says here that God caused a darkness to come upon Egypt. All over the land of Egypt, a darkness that could be felt. It was such a darkness that it was 3 days, the scripture says, that nobody left their house except 23. But all the sons of Israel had light in their dwelling. And it couldn't have been light from the sun. Everybody was indoors, and there's all kind of thoughts that this could have been some horrific sandstorm that darkened. But people did not leave their homes for 3 days, it's the Egyptians. But in every house of Israel, they had light. I read in here, how did God do that? I mean, how does he do that? Well, he does that all through the Bible. And it's no problem to him. That was nothing. Light. You see that? Light. There can be light without even a source of light. In Psalm 104, verses 2 and 3, an unknown psalmist wrote this of glorifying God as creator, that God wraps himself in light. That basically, to me, says to me, he was light. The same thing Jesus said. Here's the psalmist, hundreds, thousands of years prior to his coming, he clothes himself in light. Then we move into John, and we let's go to the first chapter of John real quick. And I'm telling you, I love the introduction to Luke's gospel, the prologue there, the first 4 verses of Luke. He was a historian and meticulous in his research and making sure he wrote down. And just to read that, just The time that he spent to research. Just like we mentioned a while ago about a Sunday school teacher trying to get. We don't want to tell anybody wrong. We just do not. I mean, even, we don't want to make a mistake. Even what we quote say an honest mistake. We just want to get it right, for God's glory, and not to mislead. And so Luke was doing that. But these verses here. Let's just read this, and I don't know how our time is going to go this morning. There is so much here God's given me. But the opening 5 verses of John, listen to this. In the beginning was the Word. Oh, this verse one is worth a whole few months of study. That in the beginning, listen to me, just like Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God. Here it is. In the beginning was the Word. And this word is capitalized. Remember we just talked about capitalization? This word is Jesus, okay? This word, the Word is Jesus. And the Word, again, was with God, and the Word was God. That is profound. He was in the beginning with God. Verse 3 says, all things came into being through him, and I love this, and apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. I mean, it basically means that there is nothing that exists that was not created by Jesus. Okay, he was the creator. Now, here it is, of light. Immediately after that, and John uses light throughout this gospel. And I'll list just my favorite book to teach from, no doubt. John, get the Gospel of John. And in him, capital him, Jesus, was life. That's another word in John that's used throughout life. Well, I tell you what, life is so important, isn't it? I mean, life that we live, but this life is life that extends forever. And the life was the light of men. And the light here is capitalized. Again, there it is, Jesus. That the life was the light of men. And verse 5 concludes this opening of this great book. The light, again, capitalized, shines in the darkness. Darkness is, these two are they're separate. Boy, they are separate, but you can't hardly talk about one without the other. And the darkness did not comprehend it. I always thought comprehend for a long time meant that nobody understood Jesus, and that is a true statement. There's a lot of people that don't get him, and they never will without God's Spirit. And don't get angry or frustrated with someone that won't listen to what you got to tell them about Jesus. Until God opens their heart, they will never, and they can't help it. They can't help it. I mean, and I've gotten frustrated a lot of times, but without God's help, they'll never be able. But this is not what it's talking about here. It's not comprehending, understanding. It's to overpower. What John is saying is that and he saw it. He saw this over and over and over. I'm gonna tell you what, Jesus was a demon casting out God. I'm telling you, there were some. You go read the book of Mark, and everywhere he went, he was casting out demons. I mean, but nothing is ever going to overpower the light ever. I mean, they are the enemies of God, and the demons and the devil. They are so far below him that he is not even no equal, no opposite God has. And we don't even want to throw Satan in there as being even close. He's so far down in ranking of power, and all his power comes from God. So the light here that he's introduced here in the first chapter of John, the light of men. Then we go to John 3, and we're not going to be done with this verse. There's a lot of these verses we're going to pick up with next week. And I love this in John 3:19. And it comes after this profound verse of John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, and whoever shall believe in him shall not perish but have eternal life. And then the verses after that are just really incredible, I'm telling you. And I just want to I could just stay there for a while, but we got to move on here. But in John 3:19, Jesus talks about he's not the judge, but if I do judge. But in 19 he says this is the judgment, that the light, capital light again, God, me, has come into the world, and men loved the darkness rather than the light, capitalized, for their deeds were evil. Now, we're going to pick that up again, but here it is again. Remember, the little mini subject here is light in the Bible. And it started with light, the miracles of light used through the Bible. God wraps himself in light. He's the light of men, and now he's talking about light and darkness, and Jesus says that the light has come into the world. Jesus has come to planet Earth, and he is that light. And that's exactly what this subject matter of John 8:12, I am the light of the world. All of this is leading up to that. An interesting statement that Pastor Tim gave, and it's that Jesus is the center of the Bible. Everything centers on him. It starts out with him, even as the creator. And he certainly will close down world history. There'll be no more history of man when he comes back and takes over millennial reign, eternal state into the end days and makes everything right, and everything is redeemed and takes back the deed to the earth and takes control over everything, not only on earth but in the universe. He will close down world history and put it to an end and put the final period, and then it will be all God from there on out. And we love that thought. So that being said, we started out with light in verse 3. We go to verse 23 in Revelation 21, the next to the last chapter in the Bible. Remember, there was no external light source in the first 3 days. Remember, God said, "Let there be light." And then on the fourth day, he created the heavens. Well, when God brings down the New Jerusalem, that's what we know as heaven, the cube, the 1,500 by 1,500 mile cube of the city, the New Jerusalem. It actually comes down. You hear that. It's going to come down and actually come down to earth in a sense, in a new created earth, okay? It comes down, however how God's going to do that. He's got it kind of pretty, he tells us enough about it to understand what he's going to do here. When it meets, John observed this when God showed it to him. He said, in the city, that's heaven, that we talked about, has no need of the sun or of the moon. We don't need that. They didn't need it in the first 3 days of creation. They don't need it. We don't need it here to shine on it. And here it is. Listen to this. For the glory of God has illuminated it. The glory of God is what happened in the beginning. Now, remember, we're talking. This is the end. Now, this is getting close to the last time God spoke to us in his Bible, in his holy word. And if that was not enough, listen to what John wrote here that God told him to write. And its lamp, its source, that's what a lamp is. A lamp is a source of light. Is the Lamb, is Jesus, the light. And boy, does that not just play right in? God spoke light. Jesus came to earth. He said, I am the light. The light of men. I came to light. And in the end, when he makes everything right, that source of light is going to be Jesus. It's going to be the Lamb of God, and that's who he'll be a lion. He comes back. Remember, he comes back. He went out as a lamb. He comes back as a lion. He will rule with a rod of iron, and he'll be the Lamb. Very fascinating. I just the subject of light in the Bible just makes such clear sense to me as far as spiritual truth and understanding that. Very interesting. Now, we just mentioned a while ago. It's fact. We'll go back to Genesis 1. We're going to bring in the subject of darkness because Jesus said, he who follows me will not walk in the darkness. And that's interesting. It's not just the darkness is immense. But in the beginning, God created, this is Genesis 1:1, the heavens and the earth was formless and void. It means it just didn't have any shape. I think of that and I go blob. It's kind of like a blob, you know. Very, very interesting here that Moses would write this. It was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good in verse 4. There was light, and then he saw that it was good, and then God separated, listen to this, God separated the light from the darkness, and then verse 5, we know this, that God called the light day, and he called the darkness, he called it night. There was evening and there was morning, and there was one day. King James says first day. Very first day of all things that ever happened was right there in verse 5 here. But as a separation of light and darkness. So let's go back to verse. Let's go back to our center verse here in chapter 8. Jesus said again and spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Bible scholars believe here, and there's so much in this verse, I'm telling you, and it'll take two, like I said, it'll take next Sunday to really unpack it all. But Bible scholars believe here, I guess I got a little bit off track this morning just looking at these things, studying beyond really, sometimes you can get in studying the Bible and it becomes more scholastic. Like sometimes I get carried away chronologically. What happened before this and then that? And then you begin. If you get too deep into it, it's still good stuff. You kind of lose. You kind of lose really God's purpose and why He did it. We kind of trying to figure out why God did what He did when He did. Sometimes that means something, and sometimes it means nothing, and you can get carried away. Is what I'm trying to say. But Bible scholars might believe here that in verse 12 is a continuation back over in chapter 7 of John. That starts with verse 37. That probably all of this might have happened at the same time. And I after studying it and thinking about it, praying about it, and really just studying and letting God's Spirit have His way, I kind of see where they're going here. That verse reads, "Now on the last day," that's not the last day that we think of as when Jesus comes back, but for the millennial reign. He explains that, John does, the great day of the feast. And this was believed that when Jesus spoke again here in verse 12, it was that same scene in the temple. This would have been the great feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacle that they call it, one of the celebration feast of Israel. And in that, and I not that I went back and found this in scriptures, but a great study Bible does wonders for you. And you kind of know when you teach the Bible, there's just some I got a John MacArthur, and although there's some things that he's expressed in some of his scriptures I may not totally agree with, most in part. I know some other great teachers here that rely on his information, and he's the one that says that probably this verse, chapter 8, verses 1, I know this is really outside of the subject of light, that the woman caught in adultery didn't happen, even though it was in the temple. Might have been inserted, and go back, and they were looking at a bunch of the old manuscripts that didn't include the woman caught in adultery. Now, it happened, don't get me wrong. But so what I'm saying is that it could have flowed from the 753 straight into verse 12 as far as chronologically happened. And this encounter with this adulterous woman about casting the stone, who is he who has no sin cast the first stone. The profound story there of that woman and the forgiveness of sins. No matter what your sin is, you can be forgiven. Might have been inserted, okay, and not part of it. All that being said, I wasted probably 4 or 5 minutes. I shouldn't have. So anyway, the tabernacle, the Feast of Tabernacles, it would have been a nightly party for God. There was understood there to be dancing. All this came from a study Bible, all that to be said. That the temple at night was lit up by these large lamps, these large candles, or torches or whatever they were, and lit it up. People that would come to celebrate, they were praising God, they were dancing and singing and praising. And I thought about Christmas time, when we celebrate Christmas, we light up, there it is, light again. What is it about light that fascinates us? And I'll just tell you this quick story. My sister came up with this great little plan since my parents have passed away. She's been really, really, really wonderful at keeping the family together and having meetings, and because we met at Mama's, a lot on Sundays, and it was like a few years ago that every Sunday, wasn't even no doubt where you were going after church. You were going to Mama's, you were going to go eat, and so anyway, God has moved on, and so she's keeping that alive. But anyway, invited me and Cindy to go down to Jekyll Island to see the lights down there, and wonderful light show. And I remember they just had songs playing, Christmas songs, some of them from biblical, some of them not, but just the light. It's just amazing. I kept saying, I want to carry my grandbabies down there to see that. Why is that? That attraction we have for light and color and things like that. Oh, think about heaven. So much in the subject of light here. Okay, so Jesus is in that atmosphere. I put myself down at Jekyll Island looking at all these lights. And he's there, and there's darkness probably out in the streets, and the temple's all lit up, and Jesus just stands up and proclaims, in a sense, I am the light of the world. Someone could have been standing there saying, man, these lights are wonderful. They didn't have light switches. They don't have accessibility to light then that we do now. A lot of things we have, we just take for granted. Running water, a water spigot, or anything. We talked about that last week, having stuff that back in these days they did not have. But I'm just picturing Jesus there, and what his this I am proclamation of there's light in his temple, and yes, you're worshiping, but I am the light. You're looking at him. You're looking at God here, and he spoke to them, saying that no one that follows me will walk in darkness. In other words, nobody. What is that darkness? I don't want to go too deep into that, but next week we'll get a little bit more into it. I believe God's going to lead us that way. That darkness is deception. That darkness is to know what the truth is. And if you follow me, you're not going to be deceived. You're not going to, you're going to know what the truth is. And that's why we believe not many people are really following Jesus. They remember last week in John 6:66 that was a difficult saying, and they were therefore his disciples were not the 12, but those that had been following him and listening to him. They followed him no more. And we talked about the horror of those three numbers that are found there in John, and they walked away from their salvation most likely. Will not walk in darkness. So then we go back and we are going to be back and forth to these scriptures. I can just tell you that's how God's moving here. Back to that opening verses in John 1. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Jesus was the light of men, and the light shines in that darkness, and the darkness will not. I'm just going to not change that, but explain it. And the darkness did not comprehend. The darkness will not overpower it. It is eternal, and it will never. So interesting here of the true light and the darkness. Now, let's step out just a minute, not outside of the scriptures, but back to Genesis 1:4, where God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, meaning what He says will take place. That's the sovereign will of God. If He says it, you will not change it, and it will happen. But He said it was good. He saw it, and it was good. Well, let's go off into the sciences just for a minute, and I even debated whether even to among those definitions. Remember, it was something. Light is something that makes vision possible. It helps me to see. That's the first. Now, right after that, within that same number one definition, he wrote this, Webster, this definition, and I'm going to change it around to make it work. But I don't want to get way off chasing this rabbit. But it is visible electromagnetic radiation. Okay, I like science, but I didn't do all that well in it. I was more of a mathematician. But I'm telling you, the things that God created, and God in numbers, and the sciences, the physics, the thermodynamics, anything that you can think of, all the ethics are God's. They're from things He created. And God gave us numbers, and He gave us brilliant people that could take light and take the flow of water. The study of fluids is an amazing subject. And people like Bernoulli's, I think that's how you pronounce that could explain water pressure and all that. He gave us numbers and gave brilliant men to put numbers to make formulas that explain things that God does. Just amazing. And sometimes you think, well, that's just man who's just that smart to figure it out. No, God let man figure it out so that we could have it, and we could have. And I remember this movie, Hidden Figures, one of my favorite movies of mine, because I like space movies, and I like the underdogs. These three black women in that movie that went to work for NASA. A true story, by the way. It's always good to listen to a true story, isn't it? I mean, sometimes fiction is fiction, and I'm not saying there's not good fiction, but this just goes back to the Bible. I'd rather hear something true myself than something made up. The truth always means more to me. So if I hear something, if there's a show about a real person, or a documentary about something that really happened, I'm more prone to listen to that, or have a desire outside of, when I do look at a television or do look at anything. So in that movie, the lady there said, I wish I could remember her name, the real name of who she was, said the numbers don't lie. And that's exactly what formulas, they don't lie. You plug a number in, you get the same result. It's just God. That's the way God is. He never changes. He's immutable, and He never changes. So let's just go there, and I just want to read some. I don't even understand what I'm reading here. I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to just read some words about light and darkness. This is fascinating. Think of this in a listen to what we say, but listen, but let God have your cogs turning in your mind of spiritual things, and you'll see some things here. Some properties of light: reflection, refraction, diffraction. That's a bunch of actions there, isn't it? Interference. That's interesting. That a property of light is interference. Hmm. You know, does that ring a bell in spiritual of somebody that interferes with light? Hmm. Polarization. All I can think of is sunglasses. Dispersion of light and scattering of light. Those are just some properties that some brilliant people came up with, and there probably are scientific formulas to prove out what this is. And that's not the purpose. The purpose is God said, let there be light, and there was light. Man said, look at this. That's just properties. What about characteristics? You said, isn't that the same? Well, maybe not, because in my little bit of search on this is what came up from characteristics, and they're not the properties. Direction. This is like what light does, and what direction, intensity, color, contrast, hardness. What does that remind you of? When your TV doesn't look right? And you look at it and you go, why is this thing too red or too green or whatever? It's too bright, too dim. Well, you can go in there on your remote if you can find it, and you'll find out. Remember, the old TVs just had knobs, and you could just, remember how you turn your brightness up and down, and you make the picture go up and down, and just crazy stuff. Characteristics of light, direction, intensity. Listen to this mind-boggling. Whoever measured this, God had to have given them insight. Light travels. Anybody have a clue to how fast light travels? Now, when you turn on a flashlight, it's like, well, pretty fast. Here it is scientifically. 299 million. Pastor Tim would love this. He's a numbers guy like me. 299,792,458 meters per second, folks. Let's just say 300 million meters per second light travels. And you want to talk about God in creation, you know, distant galaxies and stars that are so far out there, we can't take the measurement of a mile and even come close. The numbers are blow the computers up. Basically, it's so far out there. So we have a term called light year. That is light traveling at 300 million meters, not feet, 300 million meters a second. That we have a measurement called how far light travels in 1 year. They call it a light year. That's phenomenal. That means you take 300 million meters, multiply that by 60 to make a minute, another times 60 to make an hour, then another 24 times 24 to make a day, and then take that number and multiply it by 365, and that massive number is one increment light year of how far it is away. And then they say that star is 400 million light years away. Do you see the immensity of that distance? And it's just, and that's God. That is, how do you measure God? Well, we might just say light year, and that, you know, that you just say light year, so well, whatever. No, did you hear what we just said? It's unbelievable. The numbers don't lie. And so I'm saying here, when God said it was good, be amazed at that. If God says something good, you pay attention. Now, darkness, on the other hand, scientifically, might be just as amazing as light. Remember, we are talking about, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Darkness is probably is just as amazing as light. Listen to this. And by the way, let me see what Job said. I read it this morning, something new God added here about light, that God's in control of all of it. Job 38:19. Listen to what Job wrote here. Actually, this is God. This is 38. This is when Job, 37 chapters of Job's friends and Job, and a lot of things going on there. And then finally God speaks to Job. He just says, okay, now listen to me. And that's when he goes in and blows him away as creator. And here's what he says here in 19. And he's asking Job this: where is the way to the dwelling of light? Where is the way? He's asking Job, you think you know all about me? And we know what happens here in 38, 9, and 40. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place? And so listen to this. Listen to these things about darkness. I'm just going to kind of read this to you about it being more mysterious and amazing as light is. It's proven scientifically at least, that the darkness travels. I never thought about that. It travels at the same speed of light. Um, but it only travels by the speed of light in the fact that light dispels it. As quick as light comes into darkness, darkness leaves at the same speed. It's like light, it's a bulldozer that pushes darkness out. Are we thinking spiritually here? Do you hear what we're saying here? Otherwise, there's no scientific properties of darkness in itself. Isn't that interesting? All the things God gave us, there's nothing we can write down about darkness. Now, light is loaded. Stuff everywhere scientifically. Remember, we're saying all this to point this to God, that He is the Creator and He is the God that we will never understand everything about Him. But Lord, give us as much as we can take, as much as we can understand. Jesus, remember what Jesus said one time? He said, I have so much more to say to you, but you are not ready. He said that in His last words before the cross to His disciples that night before He went out to the garden and prayed in the greatest scene of spiritual warfare to me on planet Earth that night. But there are no scientific properties of darkness. Scientists, they don't even know what to say about it, okay, in itself. And no characteristics, in other words, there's nothing, we just said that, no characteristics of darkness without light's influence. If we didn't have light, we couldn't say anything about darkness. There was nothing scientifically to ever even write among the smartest and most intelligent people on earth. Best explained, and I love this is the way I understand it, there's no such thing as darkness. Darkness is just the absence of light. It is the and so without light there can't not be darkness. And it cannot even be defined. But God in the beginning mentioned there was a division between light and day, light and darkness. Division is that, we're not speaking right here. Darkness does not exist when there is light. And so very interesting scientifically looking at that and looking at the spiritual. Now let's just turn this in the next couple of minutes into, as we close here of this light and darkness, because remember what Jesus said. Let's go back to 8:12. And we'll take from 8:12 next week, Lord willing, forward. Then Jesus said again, spoke to them again in the temple, lit up. They're dancing. They're having a good time in the Lord. And He stood up and He said, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. And after 13 down to, and I'll go ahead and tell you now, 13 through probably down to 24. He may not mention light again, but this is life and death, okay? And what did He say? He is the life. The light is the life, and so we'll kind of transfer from light to life next week as we look at these that were listening to Jesus in the temple. The Pharisees, it says pointedly right here in 13, that began to deny that He was the light, and the world is denying Jesus right and left. Now, I want to go back to John chapter 1. I love it when there's so much scripture and your heart's about just to explode. But in John 1, back in verse 9, and this is about the darkness, okay? This is about the darkness. And there's some other great verses. John 3, I'm going to save it for next week. But John 1, right after John introduced Jesus, and verse 4 is the light, and in Him was life, and the light, what we just talked about. He goes to verse 9, and the heading here is rejection or acceptance of Jesus, and that is the real question. What did I do with Jesus? What did I do with Christ? So here's what John had to say about that. And John is the book of people hearing the truth, Jesus giving the truth, Him standing there saying, I am God, I am explaining God, and people were not believing, sometimes did not have the ability. Sometimes I think God was speaking and they really knew who He was, but they walked away anyway. They made a free will choice. So in John, there's the truth is plainly as it can be proclaimed, and there's people that rejected it. You see it all through John's gospel to show you the important. Don't do it. That's what John is trying to say. Please don't deny Him. Verse 9 in the opening chapter of John. There was the true light, which coming into the world, what did you say? I've come into the world. I'm the light of the world. Enlightens every man. Enlightens every. What does that mean? That means everybody, I think everybody knows there's an innate ability God put in everybody that there's a God there. Remember what Paul wrote over in Romans, the opening book, that we are without excuse. The sun rises, it sets. The glory of I got to look outside of my window right here where the sun is shining over there on that dirt road in front of my house. And but you, the things that you see in nature, the beauty of it, you just know there's a greater power. There's a creator, and that's what he means here. It lightens every man. Everybody knows, has some concept that there's something greater than me in this earth, and I don't do anything without some help, and God is there. And in verse 10, and he was in the world. Speaking of Jesus, and the world was made through him. Creator. There he is again. You'll notice that over and over giving credit to Jesus as creator. And the world did not know him. That's the ones that are walking in darkness that he talks about over in 8:12. And he came to his own, that is to Israel. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him. That's Israel. They rejected Jesus Christ. Verse 11. If anybody says, no, they didn't ever reject Jesus, well, verse 11 in John chapter 1 explains that, says that plainly. How do you misconceive that? But as many as received him, these are the ones that followed him and were not walking in the darkness, to them he gave the right to become children of God, even to those who believe his name. Now next week, that's going to be the base of what we're talking about right here. 13 says, who was born not of blood. That is not just because you are a chosen people of Israel. They are very important. Please do not forget that. They are God's chosen people, and he's putting them on hold in a sense, but they are coming back, and he's going to they're going to be the apple of his eye in the end of days. Not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, and I mean what I want to do, nor of the will of man, but of God. There's a great verse over it that says that not what man thinks he's going to do or wants to do, but what God does. That's really the epitome of man is to do God's will and to search out God's will, not my will, but God's will. Jesus said that also. So let's bring darkness and truth, light together. Light would be associated with life, darkness associated with death. Next week, I think we're going to just kind of throw out these analogies of the opposition, because John used that a lot. He used a lot of analogy, especially life and death. And so it is. Now, reading those verses and trying to bring this to a close today. Back a few months ago, Pastor Tim, and I was, for some reason, wrote this down. Every now and again, I'll have a pencil or what have you. I used to sit and take notes a lot, and then I got where I want to listen. And if God makes something stick, which I love it when he does that, I mean, sticking in my memory, I thank God he'll give me the, and the videos, man, you can go back and look at these videos, and what did he say? And you can go back and back it up, because it meant something to your soul when it was said. And it's not what Tim says or what I say, it's what God says through us. And you kind of can know. I know when I teach, I know when God's leading and he ain't. And I go home, my tail tucked between my legs sometimes. I am telling you, ashamed of myself sometimes. I might be talking about things that God and misread, but I just know my heart's not in it like it needed to be, and it makes me very sad. It really does. I'm telling you, it's tough being a teacher. I'm not kidding you. We don't just take this lightly. But here's what God gave me recall on this sermon back in November. He said of this, evil was not created, or could it exists. Now think about darkness and light without first having good or righteousness. Did you get that? Evil, and I'm just thinking darkness, was not created. Remember what we said? That there's no scientific properties on darkness. Darkness is just the absence of light. Evil was not created, nor could it exist without first having good or righteous. I'm just going to put God there in good or righteous, because listen to these other things. All things start with good, then disobedience to it, or perversion of the truth, births or brings about evil, brings about darkness. When I disobey God, or when what he says is perverted in such a way that, and then evil springs up, it comes to life. There could never be evil without first the existence of God's righteousness. Think about that darkness and light. First there was light. In the beginning God created light. Then if you take away the light, thirdly you have darkness. You take away God, and it is not good for man. And so truth and darkness, light and darkness, truth and untruth, we might say, is an opposite. Here's what I want to just say personally, and I think we all can say agree to this. Just getting up, and many of you might be older or might be younger, but I know one thing: as you get older, in the wintertime, you get colder. Someone said your skin gets thin, and I think that's very true. It is. I've noticed I cut myself a lot, or I have to bleed a lot now than I used to. But I know one thing: I've worked outside all my life, and on a cold day down in the shade, down in a swamp bottom or wherever I am when I'm down there trying to find a property line, it's cold and it's wet, it's damp. But when I come out in that sunshine and I see a beam of light over there, I try to go over there sometime and just stand in it a minute and kind of get my hands warmed up. And get kind of get revived a little bit. But I need light. That's what I'm trying to tell you physically, and you do too. We need it, and we know we need it. We need it to see by physically. It's your eyes get dim, and you can't see, and that walking in the darkness really makes sense to me. I'm telling you. And I told Cindy, we're getting on up there. I would say we're like old, but as if there was if there's 4 quarters in a football game, I think I might have mentioned this the other day. I keep thinking about this. I guess my time's getting short, and I'm getting anxious about, have I done enough, Lord? And it never is. But if it's a football game, I think I'm beginning in the 3rd quarter, and I might be in the 4th quarter, for God knows. I don't know when I'm going home. But what I'm saying is time's running out, and I'm beginning to think about these things. But I need light, and I told Cindy the other day, I said, you can't turn the light out on me. coming up the steps, you turn the light out or whatever. And I said, we got to have light or we're going to fall down and hurt ourselves. We need light. We need light to see physically and spiritually. I know that light warms me. I know that light comforts me. There's a verse, I think it's in Ecclesiastes 11:7. I like that. 11:7 has a ring to it. That it says that it is good to see the light. It's good to see the sun. That's what it said. Good to see the sun. You ever been shut in for a lot of days and it's raining and there's no, and I tell you, you say, why do I feel kind of dumpy? That's just God speaking, and it's kind of in a physical way that you don't have the sunshine. I think about like London where Chelsea had been, and I understand over there it's like pretty rare for there to be like a clear sunny day. Remember the London fog? It just sets in, and we had a day like that this week. I was going to go survey early in the morning, and I really wanted to get out early and kind of get done what God had given me to do that day. But there was a fog, and there's no use in going out in fog trying to survey. And it set in for about 3 hours, and it's gloomy. And you say, why is that? Well, it's just the way God made us. We love the light, or made to love the light. Jesus said, "Men love the darkness rather than the light." We're messed up people. We don't even know what we need, do we? We really don't. I know we need God. So this light, physically, we need. Nothing happens on earth. Nothing grows. Everything. I started thinking about the way God uses the plants and light. And somebody said one time that in photosynthesis, that one cell. I remember this blew my mind. And these are scientists now. They're probably not even godly. But I'm gonna tell you just how great God is through this. That one cell in a green tree leaf, an oak leaf, one cell is more complex in the things that happen in photosynthesis than all the, I don't know how many systems was on a space shuttle. You think about that. Probably the most complex thing man ever made, that can go up into outer space and then come back and land, take off and land from outer space. That one cell that you can't even see has more going on, more systems using light and photosynthesis in a plant leaf than the space shuttle has. That's mind-boggling. That's God. That's just the way He is. Just like the light year. How does He make something so big? How did He cause Israel to have light in their houses when all of Egypt, for a 3-day dark that they could feel, a darkness so thick they could feel? How does He do that? He's God. We don't have to explain Him. He just does it. It's no problem for Him. Well, we're going to talk about that next week. I want you to think about this torch that might have been in the temple that was lighting. I got a good little reference next week that God gave me about a torch. It's really, really fascinating. So we need light. We need Jesus. He says that I am the light of the world, and He meant it. And so next week we're going to gravitate toward that. We're going to talk about the response to the Pharisees that heard Him say that He was the light of the world. These men that he was speaking to here. Listen, there were evil people that were speaking out and were against him, but it didn't mean that everybody there was agreeing. Yeah, what? They most of them probably were not, but the leaders. Here's the whole thing. These were the leaders of Israel, and they were the ones. And some got persuaded probably not to believe Jesus, but at the same time, if God was speaking, they could see that these men were wrong. They're leaders, and there's a lot of pastors today in the pulpit that are misleading a lot of people. We might think of the terrible things that happen, like in the cults, like with Jim Jones and those. We got Jim Joneses everywhere today on planet Earth, and they mask it in such a way that people believe it and they think it's what they're saying is good, but it is not all the truth of God. And if it's not all the truth, then it's lie, and that's just the way it is. So next week we're going to look at these men that love the darkness, the Pharisees here that Jesus is speaking to, and Jesus is going to tell them the consequences of that, the consequences of rejecting me, the consequences of not following me. Remember the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness. And if you do not follow me, you will be in the darkness. And that word that the sentence that he's going to tell them or state is that you die in your sins. I want you to think about that. Dying in your sins. Dying without Jesus Christ. And so we'll speak more on that next week, and I hope this hasn't been too much on the subject of light, but just remember, God created it, he spoke it, and in the end, the light won't be from the sun, S-U-N, it'll be from the Lamb of God, the Lion of Judah in heaven. So light is a very important subject to God, and he wants us to know all about it. So let's go to close in a prayer. Father God, we praise your name, and we thank you that you are the light. You make things so plain and simple sometimes, even though it's scientifically complicated and so many facets of knowledge about light, but simply you just spoke it and it existed, and you are that God, Lord. And Jesus, when you came and said, I am light, I believe that you are. And you are the capital L light. You're the light of men and women and children and all people that come to know you. And I praise your name. Thank you. Pray that we would understand you as light. And if we don't have you, we are in the dark. Even though we might stand in the broad daylight without Jesus in our heart, we are spiritually in the dark. And I do pray for one particular person on my heart that you would open her eyes and her heart to understand this, God. I just pray you save her. And we ask all of this and give these praises in Jesus' name. Amen.